Hi everyone, I'm Felicity Brown and I'm joined together by Samantha. Today on the APCDA podcast, we meet Angela Raspas. Angela is an author, facilitator, and a speaker, and this is her book, Your Next Chapter. Sam, what did you think about today's recording? Like, what really stood out to you?
Wow, there's so much learning from my podcast with her today. And I think one of the biggest takeaway for myself is the inner dialogue that she mentioned. You know, how she mentioned that there is always two narrative internally. So there is someone that is not so good and someone who is your advocate. And I always find it very fascinating and very challenging because every time when we talk to ourselves, how do we know that we are not spiraling down towards something that is negative and not progressive? And that's where she also shared a little bit about her career values, her attributes to keep her going forward. Even if she feels forward. So that to me was really insightful. How about for yourself?
Yeah, well, I just think that she's an amazing individual. You know, this is a woman who has a late stage diagnosis for ADHD, really just in the last few years. And after she wrote that book in 2020, and she's just telling us all about her career and now she's a business mentor and she helps other business women and I don't know. I just think she's really quite inspiring that she knows how to work with her brain. She calls it a sparky brain and that how creative she is. And I think that when people watch today's podcast that they will learn a lot and feel inspired too.
Definitely. I feel like she might be my role model in how she integrate her life and her work and her business all together. I think that's amazing. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and the self-care, your question around self-care, also I think really pertinent for many of our listeners. So we'll introduce Angela now. Angela, firstly, we'd like to hear a bit about you, a bit of an introduction about yourself, your elevator pitch, like who you are really deep down.
Hey, oh my goodness, that's a deep question right up front. Well,
It
if
is.
you go from the elevator pitch perspective, first of all, as in how would I describe what it is that I do in the world? Essentially, I'm a business strategist and a self-leadership coach, but I have a very specific focus these days. After having a late stage ADHD diagnosis, I really like to focus on what I call the sparky brained women amongst us, business women, be they business owners or professionals, who have this different brain wiring and sometimes get stuck in what I describe as perpetual potential, doing well, but feeling as though there is that untapped possibility inside and not quite being able to work out why the heck can't I access it because I've got the goods, but there's something in the way. And then equally, I've found that, which I've done for many years, and I now understand why, people who are not neurodivergent tend to be attracted to the innovative thinking, the out of the box sort of off the square thinking that someone with my sort of brain can deliver. So innovative new growth opportunities, connecting the dots that you don't necessarily see. So very much in business strategy. But if you go underneath that, the thing that has driven me forever is wanting and facilitating women to believe more in themselves. And I can see how tightly the two of those are aligned. So business potential, yes, but human potential is probably the thing that I would say drives me the most. And that feeling of not good enoughness that hamstrings too many of us for too long. I'm on a trail to eradicate that, or at least soften it, so that we can actually let the real self shine and do what we're here for.
That sounds
Fantastic.
really
I love that.
inspiring. Yeah, and very empowering. I'm really curious, like what got you started? What made you realize that this is the space that you wanted to be in and this is the audience that you wanted to serve? Do you always know about this?
No, well, I think it's that innate thing. If you look back, I love the expression, I read it once, or I heard it on a podcast where a Swedish fellow whose name I cannot remember, said that life is lived forwards but understood backwards. So it's only when you actually turn around and start to examine that path, that often winding path that takes you to where you are today, and you can see the commonalities. And I can see right from a little girl being driven by curiosity and imagination and very strong empathy, like really feeling other people's feelings right from the start. But also having a lot of self-doubt, which I now know there's a lot of reasons why I probably stood out a bit much and was a bit much, and sort of bullying happened a lot when I was younger. And I think that's where the strong sense of empathy has come from. I know what it feels like to not belong. And that's a horrible feeling. So when I look back, I can see that that was driving so many of my choices and decisions. But in terms of how I got to doing business strategy, that was a bit of a necessity after children, because I was in the corporate world. But as many women who may be watching this understand, or perhaps have experienced, especially 25 years ago when, you know, my first child came along, it was tricky, very tricky to balance the two if you didn't have a wife, which I didn't have. And so that's when the flexibility of moving into my own business really became a thing. And I loved it because of the variety and the excitement of, you know, every day was different. And I was very attracted to that and fueled by that, because it has its ups and downs. It also can be very stressful, but it was the variety and the novelty that really appealed to me. And again, now I understand why.
Yeah, thanks. I'm interested then. I mean, we know that you work with business and human potential now, your own business, but can we go back to the beginning of your working life and career, and sort of thinking about when you were finishing school and what you did at that stage and where you got started with your career?
Yeah, well, back with the career guidance counselors, I grew up in a little country town in south of Auckland. And like, again, we're talking early 80s. So there was a little bit of the girl power movement, as in, you know, girls can do anything. And looking at, I was very good at school. I knuckled down, I got great marks. So what were my sort of options? And when I spoke to the career counselor, psychology was the thing that really stood out for me and was fascinating for me. And that was the direction in which I wanted to go. So I did start studying psychology at Auckland University. However, I did not complete. I dropped out. And that, I think, was one of those daggers to the heart and taking out the foundations of self-worth even then. I now understand, with the lens I have about neurodiversity, that the move from school, where everything's very structured, into university, where everything's very unstructured, it can be a stumbling block for a lot of us if we don't have the support in place. But I didn't know that. And so I internalized failure as being, you know, big loser. Obviously, you're not as smart as you thought you were. This isn't an option for you. And I ran away to Australia on a whim, literally. I was working in a newspaper over the Christmas holidays to get some money to go back and try again. Someone said, "Do you want to come to Sydney?" And I went, "Why?" And she said, "Well, why not?" 3 weeks later, I was here. And I got, because the only person in Sydney that I knew was a woman who trained me in advertising sales back in Auckland, reached out, got a job, boom, I was in media, I was in sales, and it went from there. So happenstance. I think a lot of career moves can be happenstance when you don't have strong guidance around you. My parents, God love them, they've passed away now, but my dad was a shearer and a fencer, and my mum was a cleaner. Neither of those jobs have anything negative about them. They're essential jobs, but they don't set you up for, let's talk about career paths and options and opportunities. So there was a lot of happenstance there. I started studying marketing because it looked interesting and it was accessible to me. So I was studying at TAFE for, I think it was 3 years in the evenings. It was a bit of a slog, but it was interesting and it was creative. And that sort of aspect, I now know, really ties in with my personal strengths. And so I went from advertising sales into promotions and marketing, and went from local newspapers into metropolitan newspapers, working on brand and marketing and promotions and events. again, excitement, people, ideas. So that really suited me. And that's how the path sort of happened as opposed to me seeking it out.
I can see all of that, but how did, like, when you went from one position to another, like, did you apply for jobs? Did people just think of you and offer you jobs? Like, tell me a bit more about how those moves actually happened for you.
That's a really good distinction between them because, as I think a lot of us realize, internal promotions happen a lot more than we're aware of. In terms of many jobs which you will not find on Seek, well, that was very much the case. This was, when are we talking here? In the 90s. So mid-90s, mid to late 90s. And so everything was an internal promotion. I was on a lot of what was called then cross-functional teams when I was often picked out to be thrown in with half a dozen other people to solve particular problems, to work on particular projects. And those environments gave you the opportunity to actually, I guess, be seen as someone with ideas and who wasn't afraid to put them forward. I, as you can probably tell, have no problem talking, probably a bit much. And again, that's one of those beautiful ADHD sparky brain traits. And I think that gave me the opportunity to stand out in a crowd. And then when people thought of a new role or a new situation, I was often given the opportunity, which was wonderful. Now, the only flip side to that quite often is that you don't necessarily pause and ask yourself, do I want this? Does this align with who I am, with my values, etc.? And if you couple that with perhaps someone who has a bit of a dent in their own self-worth, self-identity, then you can have a little bit of a feeling of gratitude as opposed to the attitude of, do I want this? And again, looking back with what I call hindsight, which I define as compassionate reflection, I can see how I went like, oh, sure, yes, I can do that. That real wanting to prove myself. Because this is through my 20s, in a country with no family going, wow, an opportunity, I'll just take it. Okay, never actually questioning it. Not saying they were bad moves, but now I can see that I didn't have as much agency as I would encourage my daughter and my son to have these days, to question it, not just accept it.
Yeah, so it's one thing to know that you can do something, but whether you really do want to do it, whether it aligns with your strengths and your interests.
Exactly. It's important to balance both sides of the scales, not just to accept an opportunity because it's like, wow, this is great. Let's just make sure it's great for you.
And when did you get to that stage in your career where you really thought, instead of people just offering you things because you stood out and you're presumably really good at your job, did you get to a point where you became a little bit more curating about what you would do next?
No. And the reason being was that when I had my first child, I never went back to corporate. I have not worked in a corporate environment since 1999. It's been a long time. So I've been out there, on the range since then. And so I didn't get to the point in my career projection where I made that adjustment. Rather, it came once I could take the reins, in my experience, obviously different to other people's who are employed as opposed to, unemployable, as some people say, once you've been self-employed. It was only when I had my own real core sense of agency that I took the reins more. But even then, it took a while, because when I started, like a lot of women, I started my business with, I looked at, what have I done? Okay, what are my skills? Where is the market need? Where is the intersection? Oh, I'll start a marketing agency. And off I went.
Yeah, and off you went. And then, but I know that you later on you build it up. I remember you telling me the story, you build it up, but then you realized this isn't really where I want to be.
Yeah, it was, and that was the learning. Now, I believe if you look at the timing of that, so I'm in my early to mid 30s when I started as a solo consultant because, I had a laptop and a business card, and one of the very first websites and very first social media accounts actually didn't happen for a while. And so as it grew, like I got a casual staff member, and then it grew, and then I ended up with 3 casual staff, and then it grew, and I went from home to service offices to buying an office, full-time staff. So it kept happening. And at that time, it was a case of, again, not questioning initially, because of course you want to grow. Growth is what it's all about, isn't it? Like you should want to get bigger and have more clients. Like that's what we're told is the trajectory that thou shalt, apply yourself to. And it wasn't until I was about 36 where I started going, I am so burnt. Like I've created exactly what I thought I wanted to create. Why am I so burnt? Why am I so unhappy? And that's when it kicked in and I started to go, actually, you don't have to do it the way you're told. And I think, again, if I'd been in a corporate setting, perhaps that's when it would have kicked in. Hang on, I don't have to apply for the jobs I think I should. I don't have to accept the path that is laid out for me because I should or because it's there. I can actually pause. And I think that's the key. Because if we just keep doing, as opposed to pausing and looking at the being, then we can find ourselves, that beautiful cliche of, I've been climbing the ladder, but it's up against the wrong wall. And that's that moment of realization, which is when I decided to change direction.
So burnout was really that key time for you.
Yeah, it wasn't so much like, I didn't get adrenal fatigue and fall over, but I was conscious of back then living on Red Bulls and cigarettes. Not a great, combination for a healthy life. Fortunately, they're behind me. But it was when I was exhausted a lot of the time and I was stretched, young children. I had my own two, plus my bonus boys, my stepsons, trying to juggle being a great employer, a great deliverer of workshops and marketing strategy, a great mum, a great wife. The classic story. There's nothing new here. Stretched in so many directions. What was going to give? And it was the recognition that I had choice to define my working life as opposed to, well, I better get there before everybody else because I'm the boss, and I better leave after everyone else because I'm the boss. That's not a good example, but I did not know that because it was, the fishbowl that I was swimming in. And then I started to just, see that there was a different way of approaching self-employment.
Yes, actually, I have this burning question because from where I am in Asia, in Singapore, balancing life and career is such a big thing. And like you say, working mom can have it so tough. So you decided to start your own business, wanting that flexibility for your children, for your family. How do you balance that? At the end of the day, you become an employer and you're running businesses. How is that? How do you work around that?
Well, I guess, and it's a question that I think every single working parent is going to face at some stage. And I will acknowledge immense privilege, first and foremost, that I had a supportive partner. He did travel a lot. He was in corporate world, but then went into his own business as well, which took a lot of overseas travel. So I was slightly jealous, but the fact that I had a partner who supported what I wanted to do was very helpful. And we also had, I guess, a thing that you call the mum brigade, which is, sharing pick up and drop off duties and things like that, which definitely helped. And at the end of the day, what it really came down to was that reconnection back to what's most important. And what was really important to me was to be available at key events for the kids. So they may have, and I've had to explain this when they're older because their perspective is, well, you're always working, because I might work in the evening or I might work in the weekend, and explaining that that was because I took time off to come to the assemblies, to go to the sports carnivals, to be there between 3:30 and 5, when I first picked the kids up from school, that type of thing, when I was now in my own consultancy, no longer running the agency. So it's those choices at the time which made it sometimes hard, but I was balancing as best I could. But the thing is that I actually don't believe in the word balance so much, Sam. It's more blend, because to balance, you don't move. Like, I'm balanced, I'm not moving. And no one can maintain that. It's a constant shifting blend of you making the best decisions that you can at that moment of time. I look back with some regrets on some things I did, and I look back with immense pride on others. I don't think there is like the perfect formula because it has so much to do with what the situation is. But the key is pausing again and saying, what is the most valuable to me? Because sometimes I might elevate something in importance that long term is not quite so important as what's most valuable to me, which are those relationships with my kids. So not perfect, but conversations, being brave enough if you're in an environment where you are beholden to someone else, like an employer, have the conversation explaining that you want to bring your best self to work. And to do that, there's a few things that you need from the organization. It should be a give and take. And if there's a complete, well, tough, you're probably in the wrong environment and need to look further afield, which is why a lot of us start our own businesses.
I like that part where you mentioned that we are always work in progress. I'm just wondering, what are some of your career values, or what have you formulated for yourself that works for you? Because I believe there's a lot of career decisions that you make along the way, important career decisions, and of course, at the same time, some failures that you face. And I realize that you are very positive in internalizing all these things. How do you advise people who face those challenges and not take it on themselves so hard?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think works really well is, number one is, yes, being aware of what are those values, because to me, they need to be in the heart of either the roles that you choose or the business that you create. So one of my highest values is connection. Like, I need to connect with people. I need to have the type of roles, service offerings, etc., where I'm going to spend time with people. I can never provide online courses, for example, that have no human connection, because just no. So that's reflected in taking people away for retreats and spending, face-to-face time. So looking at what are those values that you have, and I've actually got them up here. I look over here on my wall. My strengths and my values are right on my wall to remind me. Like, another value is meaningful work. So it has to feel as though I'm making a contribution. So there's lots and lots of those. So to an individual, work out those values. The second piece I think is really important is that we all have an inner dialogue. Okay. And there's a couple of voices in there. One of them is what I would call your inner critic, and one of them, which I would call your inner mentor. And so actually naming those, like Helga is my inner critic. Okay. And my inner mentor is Catherine. Now that sounds a little weird, but what it means is that it gives me space when I hear Helga going, well, that sucked. You did a really bad job there. Da, 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 da. I can recognize that this is a part of me. It is not me. There's a technique called acceptance commitment therapy or training, which you can read about. And I did some training in this, and it's just giving yourself space between your thoughts. Like, you're not automatically accepting them, and every one of us can do this. And I find it easier if we have given an externalized name to that part of you, which is criticizing or doubting. Then you can recognize, oh, hi, Helga. Nice to hear from you. I hear you've got a contribution. That's great. Thanks very much. You can sit over there. Because your inner sage, the person who is your supporter, who really wants you to succeed, has a quieter voice. And you need to hear that as well. One of the ways in which I externalize Catherine, you can't see it here, but I have a big thing called a fabulous file over in the corner of my office. It's literally a big cork board, and on there are photographs. Like when I released my book and it was in the local bookshop, there's a photo of it right there. I've got cards from clients. I've got feedback, screenshots I've taken of social media, etc., to remind myself that just because Helga says I'm not managing very well, it doesn't make it true. So we have to, this is self-leadership in action. Instead of relying on other people defining it for us, we need to be our own cheerleaders. And I don't mean toxic positivity. I mean, we can be realistic here as well, but women especially, we are more likely to be hard on ourselves than we are to go, yay, go you. So I try and tip the scales in that favor. So that's just a couple of small things that you can do to help yourself stay on track, I think.
You have just talked about, really made a 360 degree or 180 degree change in your career Angela, you were sort of talking about how in the beginning you were just sort of guided by what was out there, what was offered to you. And, now it's just so much more empowering for yourself, for others, potential. Like, to me, it's been a colossal journey by the sounds of things for you. But is there one most important decision that you made for your career? If you could just bring it down to one thing, can you think of what that might be?
What's the one thing? I think it was, and I can't remember who I heard this from, because confidence isn't a personality trait, okay? It's a skill. It's a practice, okay? And that whole feel the fear and do it anyway is true. But it was the expression that I heard was that fear is just excitement without the breath, okay? And that made so much sense because fear and excitement, anticipation physiologically feel the same. Like physiologically, it's up here where the difference is. And so I remember being told that. So if you're feeling that like fear about taking a move, asking for a promotion, asking for what's that word when they accommodations, putting a new idea forward, and you can feel all that fear, that's okay, because that means it matters to you. This is important. Your emotions are talking to you. So just breathe and go for it, because you can't steer a parked car. Like, you have to be in motion to be able to start to make those turns and those moves and make the choices in your career. So that's the key one. If you're feeling fear, that's a good thing. Don't let it stop you, because it shows that the decision or the growth edge that you're moving towards is important to you. Listen to your emotions. Yes, I've done a truckload of personal development. Like, if you look on my bookcases, there's tons of books. Even though I'm a business strategist, if you don't believe in yourself, if what it is that you are working on isn't important to you, it doesn't matter how good the strategy is. If you don't have that self-leadership, which grounds you in the value that you create, not your worth, the value that you create. Your worth is unquestionable as a human being, no matter what you choose to do. Every choice is a viable choice. It's the value that we create for others in our business, in our career, which is on the line. Nothing to do with your value as a human being. So feel the fear, breathe, listen to that message, and give it a go. What's the worst that could happen? What's the worst that could happen? Remember someone once saying, it's not a tattoo, right? A decision is not a tattoo. It's okay.
Not permanent.
Exactly. So I reckon that's the biggest thing. And I wrap that into what I say to my clients, sparky brained or not, is you can borrow my belief in you until you have it for yourself, because it's there. We just have to get you back connected to it.
Mm. So I understand like how you can make decisions, but is there one most important career decision that you did make when you look back? You said joining the dots, it's hard looking forward, but looking back, was there one career decision you made that's really made the difference?
Well, it was deciding not to go back to corporate. It was just saying, bugger it, I'm going to try this for myself. I'm going to create the environment that fits with my values and my needs right now. Because there was no guarantees at all. I could have failed spectacularly. Absolutely. But I decided to give it a go, to trust myself and accept that I would learn. I would build the aeroplane as I taxied down the runway, which I think we're all doing. We're all doing.
Yeah,
So
that you
that
can do it. So what's next for you?
Oh my goodness, so many opportunities. It's very exciting. But if I think in the things that have, one thing that's happened lately and two things that will be happening is this pivot towards acknowledging that so many of the ways in which I've worked, so many of the things, when I say things, resources, ways of working that I've developed have been because of a sparky brain. And now I know, I feel that real affinity, and the clients that I'm working with who've heard me on other podcasts, etc., have really valued that lived experience of being neurodivergent with the 20 years of business and career experience. So those two together, I know I'm in the right space. And an opportunity that's starting to happen now is organizations that have, training, consulting, coaching organizations are starting to reach out and go, well, we have specific client staff members who are neurodivergent, and they want someone to be speaking to who gets that and helps them manage it. So that's very exciting. And the other couple of things that are next is the relaunch of my podcast. I haven't podcasted for about 2.5 years, and I love it. I mean, the conversations, like we're having the opportunities to really share and extend your thinking and hear from other people. I adore it. It's one of my favorite things. So that one. And the last one is my book that I put out in 2020. That was my COVID project. It's called Your Next Chapter, Ditch Your Doubt, Own Your Worth and Build the Business You Really Want. That was before I knew I had ADHD. So I'm going to update it with that lens to make it even more relevant to the sparky-brained women of the world. So lots of projects under the umbrella of continuing to be that strategist and self-leadership coach. So yeah, the future's looking bright and fun. 2 things that I really need.
I look forward to reading
Excellent.
your book. Really. Yeah.
Oh, well,
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes. Oh, sorry.
No, just saying I can happily send you over a copy, Sam. That's easy.
Sure. Yeah, I do have a maybe last question or last 2 questions for you. One is, what would be your best career advice to our listeners here? That's one. Number 2 is, what is your self-care tip, if any? You know, you're doing so many things. How do you care for yourself?
Okay, so the business advice tip, the career advice tip, rather than grab another one out of the box, I'm going to return to that inner dialogue one, because really taking notice of your inner dialogue, noticing the patterns, noticing your Helga, what she says on a regular basis, so that you can see that it is a habit rather than a reality, is really important. If you can become aware of that inner dialogue, that is the best thing that is going to be able to help you calm yourself and push yourself forward equally. If you recognize that you don't need to be controlled by your thoughts, they're just thoughts. That's a key one. And in terms of self-care, my goodness, it's so different for so many people. I wish that I could say I've got a gold star for my self-care, because it varies. Because sometimes life gets really hard. And although that's when your self-care should be right up, it's often when it drops. So when it looks good, it means that I'm doing exercise that I enjoy, not doing it because I should, but I actually enjoy it. For me, that's Pilates, and it's walking with a girlfriend and playing golf. Good sleep, that's self-care for me. If I don't get my sleep, I'm a grumpy, horrible person who can't think straight. So I need to prioritize sleep, otherwise I'm crap. And the last one is music. I know how music shifts my mood and how it both supports it and it can shift it, because someone who's neurodivergent can have emotional dysregulation and go up and down a lot. And I need to stay aware of that and support myself. So music, actually, and nature. If I can do the 2 of them together, heaven. So it's a combination of those sort of things fitting together. And I can tell when I'm traveling well, it's because I've ticked those boxes. When I'm cranky, irritable, can't see the forest for the trees, thinks everything's going to go wrong. Oh, well, you haven't slept. You haven't been out in nature. You haven't exercised, and you're eating crap. So it's pretty self-evident. So one needs to keep that finger on your own pulse to see how you're traveling and make adjustments that work for you.
Great suggestions. Thanks so much for your time today, Angela. We really learned a lot, and good luck with your podcast too.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope it's been useful. That's always my goal, is to hopefully just there's some snippet in there that someone can pick up and run with, that they can personalize, and it helps them. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing so many practical strategies and tips that I'm pretty sure that they can anyone who is listening can take away something that is implementable for themselves. Thank you so much.